Hello and welcome to the program. I am Deji Badimasi. It's no longer news that Nigeria plans to spend 8.6 trillion naira next year. Now that's quite huge. That's the figure there. Quite huge, and it's actually the first time we'll be spending this huge amount of money. President Buhari, as you know, actually presented the budget to the National Assembly about 2 weeks ago. Now the budget presentation actually is coming this time early enough, as the government is trying to return the country to the January to December budget cycle. So everyone is hoping that the National Assembly would be able to conclude work on the document early enough so the final draft can be ready for the president to give his assent. The current budget, that is the 2017 budget, became operational June 12 this year. That is 6 months into the year. So we certainly don't want a repeat of that. But let me quickly take you through some of the figures we should all keep an eye on for the 2018 budget, which the government has, of course, tagged budget of consolidation. Now, just take a look at this now. The total budget size, as we said, 8.6 trillion. That's 8.61 trillion naira. That's just around, you do the calculation now based on the current exchange rate, that would be somewhere around 28 point something billion dollars. The bulk of the revenue, of course, will be coming from non-oil. That's something very good. But very key to that, the non-oil revenue now is the oil revenue, because you actually need this to work to be able to generate enough from here. And that's the strategy the government says it wants to adopt. We're going to talk about that later. We'll listen to the Minister of Budget and National Planning now explain that better. Recurrent expenditure is still quite high, 3.49 trillion naira. That's close to 70%, about 70% of the budget. And then you have capital expenditure at 2.43 trillion naira. That's around 30% of the budget. For a very long time now, the debate has always been to try as much as possible to reduce the current expenditure so that you have more money to spend. Capital expenditure, that is very key. But then this is quite huge when you consider how much we had actually budgeted for capital in the past. So the government retaining what it actually budgeted for in the current budget now. That's the budget for 2017. Capital expenditure 30%. It's still continuing now with that 30%. But one part of the budget that is giving people a lot of cause for concern is the deficit. Of course, the figure is dropping. The last budget, that's the 2017 budget, which we're currently running, the deficit was somewhere around 2.36 trillion. This time it has come down to 2.01 trillion. And the reason is just because the government says it plans to refinance our current debt. And so it's coming down, but not coming down as significantly as you would expect. So you can imagine how much we're spending on servicing our budget, and debt servicing now 2.01 trillion. And look at the capital. So debt servicing, what we're spending on debt servicing, very, very close to what we're spending on capital. So it's still a very big problem, very big problem. Then you have, what other thing to take note of there? Well, statutory transfer, 456 billion. And then you have the other figures, but debt servicing, still a very big problem. Let's take a look at some of the key benchmarks now of the budget. Crude oil price, $45 per barrel. You would say that is good because oil is currently trading above that figure, somewhere in the region of $60, which is quite good. And the projection is that the price of oil will continue to stay higher than this figure. So that means we'll have enough to save. So which means we should be expecting more money to accrue to the excess crude account, and that will no doubt build up our foreign reserve. Now, oil production estimate 2.3 million barrels per day. If you ask me, I'd say that's quite ambitious. The target for last year was around 2.2 million barrels. The target now for this year, I should say, I keep saying last year now, but we're actually in 2017, and the target, the benchmark, production benchmark for this year's budget is 2.2. We have not been able to meet it. I know we're doing somewhere around 1.9, so 2.3 million barrels per day, some people will tell you is ambitious, and that will depend on the peace in the Niger Delta holding. Now, you take a listen, you take a look at what happened a few weeks back when militants of the Niger Delta, not men this time, but the Avengers, threatening to resume attack on oil facilities. That is something you actually don't want to happen, because if that happens, it means it will affect, affect our target and definitely affect what the country will make in terms of oil revenue. Then average exchange rate 305 Naira to the US dollar. We actually retained the exchange rate we're using for the current budget, but some people will tell you that, well, you look at the current market value of the dollar, it's just around 360 to the dollar, but then the government is retaining that at 305. The expected GDP growth, 3.5. Well, we just have to wait and see by the end of 2018 now, if we're able to achieve this GDP growth. Quite ambitious, some people will tell you. The expected inflation rate, 12.4%. Inflation is currently at around 15.9%. Who knows? You never can tell. By 2018, we just might be able to achieve this, but we just have to wait and see. But it then means that we'll have to work very hard to make sure monetary policy and, of course, fiscal policy actually converge to work better for the economy. Now, let's look at the breakdown now by sector. It's no surprise at all. Power, works and housing getting the largest chunk of the budget at 555.88 billion. That's exactly what we did with the 2017 budget. The government plans to continue to spend heavily on infrastructure, and this is a clear demonstration. And then next you have transportation and special intervention program, 150 billion. Well, in the last budget, it was around 500 billion. That money we were not able to raise. So the government has now decided to cut it down to 150 billion. What else? Agriculture and rural development, 118.98 billion. Some people will tell you that is actually quite small, especially when you consider the fact that the government plans to diversify this economy, is actually doing so, and its major focus has been on agriculture. So devoting 118.98 billion to agriculture, some people will tell you is quite small, but then it's actually higher than what was budgeted for in that sector now last year. What other things should we take a look at? Education, well, that's quite small too, 61.73 billion. A lot of people expect it to go up, at least come up to, well, maybe not come up to the UN required standard, but 61.73 billion is quite small. But what the government will tell you is that it is higher than what was budgeted in previous years. Something else I want us to take a look at, the Niger Delta Ministry. What is actually going to the Niger Delta? Because this is very key. For a long time now, the people of that part of the country have complained that the government has neglected that region of the country. So what the government is trying to do now is to pump in money there. Niger Delta Ministry getting 53.89 billion, and then you have the Niger Delta Development Commission getting 71.20 billion. Don't forget that you also have a budget now for the government's amnesty program. We understand that should be coming up to around 60 or 63 billion naira. So quite a lot going to the Niger Delta. But then one key thing you must not forget is that these figures are still proposals until the National Assembly finally puts its seal on the document. So we might see some of these figures change eventually, but perhaps not substantially. Now, the budget revenue is quite ambitious, no doubt, when you look at the figures. But then, if you consider how the current budget has fared as far as the revenue side goes, you're likely to scratch your head how the federal government will fund the 2018 budget. Take a listen now to the Minister of Budget and National Planning, Udoma. Explain how the 2017 budget has fared so far as revenue is concerned.
FGN's oil revenues and customs revenues performed almost to target. So customs performed almost to the target over the three quarters. And even though oil production averaged 1.9, we've actually performed almost to target in terms of oil receipts because of the higher average oil price. So we've been able to achieve, as of the end of the third quarter, 1.6 trillion naira in terms of oil revenues. However, our non-oil revenue performance is still an issue that we have to work harder to achieve. As I said, customs has achieved target. However, companies' income tax and VAT have underperformed, although we understand that there are some seasonal elements to the CIT, VAT, and so on. And so the jury is still out until the end of the year before we will really know the extent of our performance. However, independent revenues are a problem because they are so far from the target that it is clear that we have to do more work in that area. As you know, we have already seen that many of our agencies are simply not remitting what they ought to be remitting. You know the example that His Excellency Mr. President indicated, that I think we're getting over 7 billion from JAM, whereas over the last 5 years, I think they were remitting only about 50-something million. So we really have to do more work to look at all these agencies and actually scrutinize carefully, the targets that they have given us, and to try to make sure they actually achieve those targets.
Who knows that revenue is a big challenge? Take a listen again to the minister.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the primary problem of this country is revenues. That is our primary problem. Our tax revenues are only 6 or 7% of GDP. Many countries, there's over 20%. What we have is a revenue problem, and we just have to work at it. The target that we have in the ERGP is to take it to 15% of GDP. We have to look at initiatives that can achieve that. Once we can get our revenues up, you will find that our debt service to revenue ratio is very low. You will find that almost everything else is the same, but revenue is the primary focus. And our focus is to try and take revenues maximize revenues from the oil sector, and take those revenues from the oil sector and spend them in the non-oil sector, so as to get the non-oil sector driving the economy. Because oil is a wasting asset. In a few years' time, people are already announcing that they will not be using petrol and diesel cars in a number of years. So this is the time to maximize our revenues from oil and spend those revenues in the non-oil sector. And that is basically the strategy of the ERGP, the strategy of this government, the strategy of our plan.
Now, one area the government is hoping to generate substantial amount of revenue from this time to fund the 2018 budget is on tax. Problem is that Nigerians actually don't pay tax, but that may just about to change. Take a listen to Kemi Adeosun, the Minister of Finance.
What happened to us was oil came. We decided that we didn't need tax anymore. We had so much oil that there was no need for anybody to pay tax. All we needed to do was to get the oil and spend it around in the economy. But what we've discovered as an administration is actually that model is the wrong model for any economy, because one, we don't have that much oil. The Saudi Arabians, I'm sure you know these statistics, they have 10 million barrels of oil every day, and there are just 30 million Saudis, so they can afford to say we don't collect taxes. We only have 2 million barrels of oil a day, and there are 180 million of us. So the oil is just simply not enough to sustain government revenue. So people are not paying taxes, not because of apathy, but because we have gone now for the last 30 to 35 years with a culture where people haven't paid taxes and there's been no consequence. So we have to invent that culture of being taxpayers, of being responsible citizens, of joining together to do collectively what we couldn't do individually. So the idea, and it's a very circular argument that, I don't pay because I don't see what I'm getting. It is flawed, and it won't take us anywhere. We are going to have to come together as a nation for the future, for our next generation, and come together and do the right thing. The beauty of the tax system is that it's progressive. So those who earn the least pay the least, and those who earn the most pay the most. The problem we have currently in Nigeria is that of 14 million, we only have about 14 million taxpayers, but about 69 million people are working some form of economic activity or another. Out of that 14 million, the majority of them are PAYE. Those are salary earners, which means that the high net worth are not paying the right, or either not paying or not paying enough. And that's what we're simply trying to correct now with the VADES program. We're saying those people who haven't been paying the right taxes should please come in and do the right thing. Many people have 2 or 3 incomes. Even some of you in the room have shops, have businesses that you're running on the side. We don't pay tax on those incomes either. So if everybody comes in and does the right thing, we can drive the country forward. Our tax to GDP ratio today, 6%, is the same as Saudi Arabia. We can't afford to be like Saudi Arabia. We don't have their oil. We need to move closer to other countries who have some oil, but also collect good taxes, like Mexico, like Egypt. They have tax to GDP ratios of 16, of 19, and they also have oil. In fact, even America has more oil than us. America, shock you to know, produces 5 million barrels of oil every day, and they still collect taxes. So we need to come away from this argument that Nigerians will pay when they are happy to pay. I always use this example. The man standing outside today in the hot sun, directing traffic, is paying his taxes. And he doesn't have a choice in the matter. So it is wrong for people who earn the most to now give conditions on when they will do what is their duty. So we need to really come away from that argument and go back to recreate what made Nigeria great in the first place, which were these structures that we had. Most of our infrastructure was built before we found oil. So can you imagine what will happen if we now manage our oil properly, get people to pay the right taxes? We can actually grow this economy.
Now, if you recollect, there were media reports not quite long ago that the government was granting tax holiday to certain corporate organizations. The Minister of Finance has been speaking on the issue. Take a listen.
There's no tax holiday being given to anybody. I need to make that very clear as a matter of policy and a statement. There's no tax holiday. What we have is the Road Trust Fund. And what we said to the private sector is if you construct a road, you can take your money back over 3 years using tax credits. That is, the money you should have paid as tax, use it to recover your money. So effectively, the private sector actually lending us money. We have not given tax holiday to anybody. In fact, if anything, we don't believe in tax holidays, this administration. So trust me, there's no tax holiday being given to anybody. That was a misconception. It's the Road Trust Fund that has been very well received by the private sector, because some of them are in areas where their factory is affected by a bad road. So we're saying, okay, all of you can get together, do the road, and then use your own money and do the road, and then take your money back over 3 years. The money you should have paid as tax, use it to recover your money. That's not a tax holiday. So this administration hasn't given anybody a tax holiday.
Well, we'll take a short break here, and when we come back, I'll have some guests weigh in on this budget of consolidation. Stay with us, don't go away. On Deji 360, we don't just ask the questions. What is wrong with amending the Constitution the way the National Assembly members have been doing it? We seek answers.
Constitution is constituent. Our problem is not lack of laws. Our problem is lack of the willpower to implement our laws.
Answers that provide clarity.
While we negotiate, we should try to make it a point that the girls must be complete.
The clarity you need to make informed judgment so that you can make the right decision and take action. People are saying it is you politicians that are responsible for this, that you are the reason why this is happening.
All these dullards that call themselves governors in this country?
I wish we had people like Tony at the National Assembly.
God forbid that I go to join that band.
DG 360, providing clarity to issues.